Good morning. I am Russell, if you don't know me. And apologies, it seems like the electrical storm that we had the other night had a little something to do with this screen on this side. But that's the good thing about two screens, is that if one goes out, you still have one. Good, all right. I've been worried about those taking star tests, but I think we're okay. We all get it. This morning we're going to be continuing reading through Acts and pondering the question, what does it mean to be the church, and how do we, who are the church, how do we be the church? And so we're going to be picking up today in Acts chapter 9 at the first verse, if you'd like to follow along. Meanwhile, Saul, still breathing threats and murder against the disciples of the Lord, went to the high priest and asked him for letters to the synagogues at Damascus, so that if he found any who belonged to the way, men or women, he might bring them bound to Jerusalem. Now he was going along, approaching Damascus. As he was going along, approaching Damascus, suddenly a light from heaven flashed around him. He fell to the ground and heard a voice saying to him, "Saul, Saul, why do you persecute me?" He asked, "Who are you, Lord?" The reply came, "I am Jesus, who you are persecuting. But get up and enter the city, and you will be told what you are to do." The men who were traveling with him stood speechless because they heard the voice, but saw no one. Saul got up from the ground, and though his eyes were open, he could see nothing. So they led him by the hand and brought him into Damascus. For 3 days he was without sight, and neither ate nor drank. Now there was a disciple in Damascus named Ananias. The Lord said to him in a vision, "Ananias." He said to him, "Here I am, Lord." The Lord said to him, "Get up and go to the street called Straight, and at the house of Judas look for a man of Tarsus named Saul. At this moment he is praying, and he has seen a vision of a man named Ananias come in and lay his hands on him so that he might regain his sight." But Ananias answered, "Lord, I have heard from many about this man, how much evil he has done to your saints in Jerusalem. And here he has the authority from the chief priests to bind all who invoke your name." But the Lord said to him, "Go, for he is an instrument whom I have chosen to bring my name before the Gentiles and kings, and before the people of Israel. I myself will show him how much he must suffer for the sake of my name." So Ananias went and entered the house. He laid his hands on Saul and said, "Brother Saul, the Lord Jesus, who appeared to you on your way here, has sent me so that you may regain your sight and be filled with the Holy Spirit." And immediately something like scales fell from his eyes, and his sight was restored. Then he got up and was baptized, and after taking some food, he regained his strength. For several days he was with the disciples in Damascus, and immediately he began to proclaim Jesus in the synagogues, saying, "He is the Son of God." This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Will you join me in a moment of prayer? Amazing God, so often we go through our lives doing what we think we need to be doing. God, so often we long for an experience like Saul's, where you get our attention, forcing us to stop, forcing us to listen, and asking us to look. Lord, in this hour as we worship you, open our eyes to see you. Open our ears to hear your voice. Open our hearts to listen and to go. Amen. Well, since Easter Sunday, we've been working, which is really just last week. We started looking at what does it mean to be the church? What does it mean to be those who are Jesus now that Jesus well, we skipped a little bit ahead. Last week we talked about this, that liturgically, which is the church's calendar, we're skipping ahead because we're not yet to ascension, but here we are in Acts, and Jesus has already ascended. So we're just going to go with it, and we're going to say that Jesus is not here among the apostles in bodily form. And so we've jumped again. Last week we talked about how the disciples were doing ministry. They were teaching and healing in Jesus' name, and they had been told numerous times to stop, and they refused to stop. And we talked about last week how they basically told the council that told them to quit, to zip it and stop, that you're not the boss of me, and I'm going to keep doing what I want to do, so nana, nana, boo-boo. It was something along those lines. It's not the exact translation, but you get the gist. And so they continue to do this, and then it all comes to a head in chapter 7. In chapter 7, they get a hold of Stephen, who is the new guy. It's always the new guy, right? You always know it's the unimportant characters that are going to... and in case you didn't know it, Stephen gets it. They finally had enough with this disciples and all their ministry and telling about Jesus, and they decide to make an example of Stephen. And so Stephen, he is stoned, and it's at the stoning of Stephen that we meet a man named Saul. And Saul was there giving approval, saying, go ahead. And by the way, can I hold your coat so you have you have more mobility as you're stoning this fella? That's where we meet Saul. And Saul, he becomes an important character in the life of the early church. Acts itself, the whole book of Acts, the Acts of the Apostles, records the activity, which is a good name for the book, right? It's the activity of the church, Acts of the Apostles. It records the activity that they're up to, the things they're doing and the ways that they're moving and telling and teaching. But it also reads not just as kind of like a historical, here's what happened and then this happened and then this. It also reads as a really good underdog story. We love underdog stories. And so picture this. See if we can make a good story out of this. Against all opposition, against imprisonments, against threats, and even executions, a movement persists. Can you almost hear the Return of the Jedi music in the background, right? A movement persists. And with new and even more unbelievable converts every day. Today's passage is kind of in the middle. It's like the meat or the non-meat in a sandwich of conversions. Right before this, you have the conversion of the Ethiopian eunuch. Along the road, a man from a far and distant land, like literally the end of the world, was Ethiopia at this time. It was a place that you'd heard about, but you'd never been to. And he's converted, and he takes the gospel back there. Then comes this experience with Saul, and immediately after Saul, we have the conversion of Cornelius, who was a Roman soldier. So here you have someone who's completely in a different land, comes from a faraway place. Then you have the next person to be converted is the one who was the biggest opponent and working actively against the Christian movement. It wasn't yet called Christianity yet. And then you have a Roman soldier, another one who is set to enforce the law and to keep things like this little uprising in Jesus' name from happening. And it's through these testimonials that Luke continues to tell the story and to put this point before us that Matthew talked about in Matthew's closing gospel remarks, that Jesus sends them as witnesses in Judea and Jerusalem and to all the ends of the world. Luke begins by saying, here's how the apostles lived into that call and lived into that task, going literally to the end of the world with this convert from Ethiopia. In Jerusalem with Saul, and to a guy who was from Italy. This is how the gospel spreads. And Luke's point is that Christ casts a wide net and captures people from all walks of life. It was a few weeks into my first semester in college that I had some interesting conversations during my time there, but it was the first time I remember thinking, I never thought of it that way. I was having a conversation with somebody who I had befriended, somebody who I could talk to about how it was feeling to be away from home and how we were enjoying the freedom, but not as so much the responsibility. And even though it wasn't that much responsibility, but it felt like a lot. And we had a conversation, and I still remember this conversation to this day. I had a conversation with my friend where he kind of broke into the room, not breaking literally into the room, but he came into the room almost in a Kramer way, for those of you who are Seinfeld fans, like came in with a purpose, and he's got something to tell me. And he said, guess what? I don't know, man. You got an A on a paper? No. I think I found my nemesis. And I said, oh, really? Oh, cool, I guess. But he was really excited about it. He almost seemed proud to have found someone to call nemesis. Anybody? Just kidding. Don't tell me if you have nemesis. But it was an interesting thing because I had really never thought of having a nemesis. I'd never thought about this being something I need to search for in my life. But maybe part of this new world that I'm living in called college, maybe part of that is one of the responsibilities I need to take on is finding my own nemesis. Actively seeking out someone to oppose me. I never really understood what he meant by it. I probably, even in the old days, we had these things called dictionaries. And you had to open them up and look and they were alphabetical. Nowadays, we just type it in Google. But I might have even had to check and make sure, do I really know what nemesis means? I never really understood what he meant and why he was so excited about it. But maybe his being able to find his nemesis so early on made his college experience a more rich experience than mine. Because I never did find my nemesis. I'm still looking. But a good story needs that. A good story needs an antagonist. Without an antagonist, there is no action, and life is kind of ho-hum. And so maybe my friend found what would mean he was going to have a better story at the end of it. Be like, it was 4 years. 4 years I worked against this guy, my nemesis. Whereas me, I was like, I got a piece of paper that said I went to class, did my assignments, and then they let me leave. And kept asking me to pay, even after I left. But the way that Luke tells the story of the early church is, if Luke is searching for a nemesis, Luke finds that nemesis in Saul. Later we come to know him as Paul. But it's Saul, it tells us in chapter 8, right before this, that Saul was, and I love these two phrases, Saul was ravaging the church by entering house by house and dragging off both men and women. Ravaging the church. Entering houses and dragging people away. And then today we had a good phrase at the beginning. Did you catch the good phrase? Meanwhile, Saul, still breathing threats and murder. I don't know. It sounds like a pretty good nemesis, don't you think? And so the table is set for an epic struggle. An immovable object meets an irresistible force. And Luke is setting it up for this great story to be told about good and evil and the struggle between them, and then it's over. Just like that. The struggle's over, and the battle just barely had begun. It's decided swiftly when Jesus steps onto the scene. Jesus takes an interesting route in addressing the problem of Saul as the church's nemesis. Jesus, his interesting approach, get this, Jesus sees a problem and he confronts it. Really weird. He doesn't avoid it. I do that. He doesn't try to find an alternate. If somebody's standing in your way, grocery store, whatever, I go kind of like this. But you know what always happens? At that moment, they see something on the other shelf, and they move right in that direction. And then we do a moment where we're dancing to whatever music is on the speaker, and I'm just trying to find my way. Just need to get to the peanut butter, please. But Jesus confronts him. We may all be familiar with the story of Saul's conversion. But have you ever considered this about that story? That this is the first time that Jesus causes blindness. This is the first time that Jesus causes blindness. A lot of times he had gone around healing, curing, taking blindness away and making blind people see. But this is the first time that he causes it. And that may seem a little bit cruel, but we have to keep in mind Jesus' goal. The purpose of what he's doing is to bring Saul from a persecutor to a follower of Christ. And if you've read the stories of those who encountered Jesus as blind, when they left, they could see, and when they left, they believed. And so, in that way, Saul joins those who long before it was written sang the hymn, "Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was blind, but now I see." What might this passage be speaking to you and me? Well, from the looks of it, none of you, at least to my knowledge, none of you are persecuting the church. So far today, I haven't seen anyone dragged out of the church, so we got that going for us. It's not over yet, somebody says, and all of a sudden everybody starts clenching their jaw and getting ready. But none of you, from what I've seen, none of you are persecuting the church, and it seems that most of you are already believing. At least you believe enough to wake up and get here in the morning. So maybe we don't need to really look at Saul as what Jesus is pointing us to this day, although we can. But maybe we can look at Christ's approach to things in this passage. Not just in confronting the problem directly, but also in the way that Christ sets a task before Ananias. Maybe looking at that interaction specifically, could shed some light on what God may be putting before you and me and this church, on how to be the church. Jesus sends Ananias to a known enemy of the church, infamous, which if you haven't seen Three Amigos means you're more than famous. And if you haven't seen Three Amigos, go watch Three Amigos. That's your homework. But imagine being asked to do that. Imagine if I were to give you a task today and say, I want you to go to somebody who's been dragging people out of their homes, because that's where they had church, out of their homes and their churches, and persecuting them and throwing them in prison and seeking to have them killed. Imagine that. I don't think I'd have too many takers. I mean, honestly, it's hard to get people to serve on committees. Maybe that says something about committees too, I don't know. Saul and others viewed Christianity as a disease that needed to be eradicated. This movement that needed to be stopped. Where might we encounter similar opposition in today as the church? Where might we encounter those who are opposed to Christ? We may not have people dragging people out of houses, at least not here. Thank God we live in this nation. But I see a lot of people who are angry at the church, who are angry with Christians. I got a lot of Facebook friends. And I got a lot of Facebook friends who have a lot of friends who aren't in the church. At least somebody got to their comment section somehow. What uncomfortable tasks might Jesus be calling followers to go and do in order to form instruments for the building of the kingdom? What's the uncomfortable task? I don't know what it is for you, but I think that it involves being willing to hear the call of God and the call of Jesus to go and do something that may not feel like it's the most fun thing in the world. Now, eating broccoli may not count, but what task for the sake of the kingdom, for the sake of creating an instrument for the gospel? I'm not very good at building things, but I like to try. Building things is hard work. It's frustrating. There are times when I am building something that I become a worse version of myself because I'm so frustrated. Building is hard work. It's messy. You make a big mess, and it has to be cleaned up afterwards. But one of the major reasons that I enjoy building is because it is so rewarding. Because at the end of the day, I've changed something, the way it looks. I've changed the environment that that thing is now in. What places are we being called to do work that might be frustrating? That might be slow, that might be messy, that might be exactly the wrong thing that we want to be doing. Did you notice in this whole passage that really the hard work had already been done? That we know it from the outside looking in, but Ananias didn't know it. Ananias didn't know that Jesus had already set him up to knock him down. Jesus had already done the hard work and needed Ananias to go. Jesus had set the table for Ananias, and he sets the table for you and I. To go, to come to this place, to eat this bread, to drink this cup, to be filled so that we might be emptied for the sake of the gospel. And so we who hunger and thirst, we come to this table. A good story does need a nemesis, but it also needs a hero. And so in this place we come to find our hero. We come to find the one who sets us free.